For years, people looked at me and saw only a blind woman, someone who needed to be protected, someone who needed to be guided. Then I bumped into a man who made armed people freeze in fear, a man who only had to whisper a single word for everyone to obey. But I didn't know who he was. I didn't know the whole city trembled when he walked into a room. The problem is that I handed my heart to Carmine Barbieri, and I found out that loving a man like him came at a price, and someone was willing to turn me into the weakness that could destroy him. Hi, I'm Lena. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1: The Bump That Stopped the Ballroom. The scent of amber was still on my fingertips when I sealed the last vial. I'd been working head down over the studio bench for 3 hours, adjusting a bergamot note that insisted on overpowering the cedar, and I only realized the sun had set from the different sound the street makes when the asphalt cools. The building's breathing changed at nightfall. The pipes upstairs stopped groaning. The dog belonging to the neighbor in number 2 finally went quiet, and the wind started slipping through the crack in the window, carrying the smell of rain coming in near the Delaware River. I ran my hand across the bench, found the main vial by the notch I'd carved into the glass, and brought it close to my nose one last time. The official perfume for the ball had to perform an almost impossible task: please 300 guests at the same time without any of them suspecting they were being pleased. It was the kind of commission my mother, if she were still alive, would have refused on principle, and that I accepted because it covered 3 months' rent. "You're sniffing that again," Bianca said from the doorway. "Ma, if you sniff it one more time, your nostril is going to file an official complaint." Bianca Toselli was the florist from the building next door, my friend since I'd worked up the nerve to go around the block by myself, and she had a personal theory that every woman needed a friend who talked too loudly to make up for all the times the world forced her to speak softly. With me, she fulfilled that role with honors, and with an enthusiasm that bordered on a calling. "It's good," I said. "Almost too good. Then close the bag, put on the heels I picked for you, and let's go. It's already 8:15. I put on the heels, left the cane propped in the corner of the table because Bianca insisted it didn't match the dress, and I regretted the gesture before I even crossed the door. Agreeing to cross a packed ballroom without the cane meant agreeing to depend on her arm. Depending on anyone had given me a mental rash since I was 15. "I'm taking it," I said, going back. She didn't argue. That was one of the reasons I loved her. Her car smelled of fresh eucalyptus, gardenia, and an old layer of coffee spilled on the passenger seat that no air freshener could disguise. I clicked the seatbelt, leaned my temple against the cold glass, and tried to mentally rehearse the route to the Falcone Institution's ballroom. Marble lobby, 3 low steps, hallway to the right, main hall. Bianca had described the place to me twice during the week, and I'd memorized the distances and steps. "You're nervous," she said. "I'm focused." "You're nervous. I can tell by the way you squeeze the vial." I let go of the vial. I squeezed my knee. "Better?" "No, but it's prettier." The charity ball took place every year to support a cultural institution that funded libraries in the city's public schools. I knew that because I'd read the material 3 times before accepting the commission. What I didn't know, and no one had told me, was that the entrance lobby smelled of cut flowers gone too long, expensive perfume badly applied, and a faint metallic edge of security equipment that I'd never picked up at any charity event before. It was the kind of smell sighted people probably didn't notice because they had other things to look at. "Bianca," I murmured, while she gave our names at the reception desk. "There are a lot of armed people here." "What?" "Forget it." Leah Falcone came to greet me herself. From the firm handshake, from the perfume of iris and leather with a base of bergamot, and from the way she pronounced my full surname, I understood she was a woman who decided things before she even sat down, the kind who run entire institutions without having to raise their voice, and who probably did far more than organize charity balls. She led me down the central hallway, described the stage with careful patience, and positioned me beside the table where the main vial would be presented. The marble of the floor beneath my feet was colder than the one in the lobby, a small detail, but one that told me that wing of the building stayed less exposed to the warmth of the guests. "Viola has 10 minutes to speak," she said to someone beside her, her voice turning toward a point I couldn't see. "And then we clear the area." I spoke my 10 minutes without stumbling. I told the story of the bergamot harvested still green in Calabria, of the choice of aged cedar that took 6 months to arrive, of the final note of vanilla that refused to marry the rest over 3 whole weeks of attempts. I felt the hall breathe with me in a few passages, a woman who laughed quietly when I described the vanilla's stubbornness, a man who applauded before the right moment and was imitated, off to the side, by the people near him. Bianca squeezed my arm lightly when I came down from the stage, a sign that it had gone well, and then the hall swallowed me. 300 perfumes at once are a particular kind of sensory violence. It's like being spoken to by 300 voices at the same time, all saying different things, all demanding an immediate response. The alcohol of an expensive cologne, floral deodorant with a synthetic base, warm champagne mixed with the leather of a new bag. In 15 minutes, my sense of smell started to fail. In 20, the headache crept up the back of my neck with the determination of something that had come to stay. In 25, I'd excused myself from Bianca and was looking for the side hallway that Mrs. Falcone had mentioned in passing, as a discreet exit to get some air. I found it by the difference in temperature. The hallway was 3 degrees colder, 20 decibels quieter, and smelled of old floor wax and the industrial lavender of the restrooms. I sighed for the first time in an hour, and the air entered my lungs with the slowness of something very much needed. I walked a few more steps, my hand sliding along the wainscoting to orient myself, and that's when it happened. I didn't sense the presence beforehand. That was the detail that would stay with me afterward. I always sensed it. But in that hallway, the man I bumped into was standing in absolute silence, not breathing deeply, no vulgar perfume, no rustle of clothing. My shoulder met his chest with the innocence of a door that swings shut on its own. There was a sound I'd never heard before. It wasn't one, it was several. Combat boots locking against the wooden floor, a suit jacket being opened too fast, metal against leather. I counted by the sound, without having to think. Several pairs of hard soles positioned around us, a semicircle closing in front of me and another farther back, muffled by the curve of the hallway. More men than I wanted to have counted. I didn't move, not because I understood the danger, because his hand had landed on my arm with a very specific weight, and my body was still processing what that touch meant. It was firm without being tight, cold without being hostile, and it held me in place as if that were exactly its function, to keep me from leaving while something I didn't understand was being resolved around us. And then he spoke. Easy. The word had 2 recipients. I understood it from the curve of his voice, from the way the a was lower than the sy, from the way he cast the sound over my shoulder before bringing it back to me. It was for the others, and it was for me, and it was for me that he held it a second longer. Several breaths around me were held at the same time. Several were released together, afterward, when he spoke. The sound of the boots ebbed away like a tide being called back. The weapons, I imagined from the dull sound of leather, were going back into their holsters, and the hallway recovered a silence that was completely different from before, denser, more restrained, like air after thunder. It was the first time in a long while that someone held me without asking whether I needed help. It was the first time in 11 years that someone touched me, and I didn't feel pity inside the gesture. Sorry, I said, finding my own voice steadier than I expected. I didn't sense you there. He took his time answering. I used the time. His perfume was now inches from my face, and it was the clearest thing I'd smelled in the whole building. Woody, rare, sandalwood balanced on vetiver in a way I'd only smelled in 2 or 3 European bespoke houses. Expensive in a way that didn't announce its price, which was the definition of very expensive. There was also something beneath all of it, something that didn't come from any bottle. Good car leather, cold winter night air, and an almost imperceptible residue of smoke, not from a cigarette, from something else. It wasn't your fault, he said. The voice was low, without urgency, with an old weariness beneath it that he had no intention of hiding. You wear a rare woody perfume, I said, before I thought about whether I should. Is it bespoke? It's not one of the famous Italians. There's an old cedar I've only smelled in 3 houses in the world. His hand stayed on my arm a second longer than it needed to. Then it let go, slowly, like someone giving the other person time so they don't fall. Florence, he answered. I figured. Do you have your own as well? I wear the simplest one I have. At a party, strong perfume is bad manners. There was a short sound that could have been a laugh, if he'd allowed himself the whole thing, but it came out halfway, as if the rest had forgotten the way. I sensed, without anything to show it, that there was something this man didn't do often. Good night, I said, because it was time for me to no longer be there. Good night, miss. I walked. I didn't stumble. I didn't speed up. I mentally took up the cane, raised my chin a millimeter, and counted 10 steps before touching the wall with my fingertips to confirm the curve of the hallway. The wooden wainscoting was slightly damp there, maybe from being near the restrooms, and that small, concrete texture helped me breathe my way back. It was only in the restroom, with the door locked and the smell of industrial lavender rising from the faucets, that I sat in the chair of the anteroom and realized my hand was trembling. I looked at the tremor the way you look at a new scent on the bench, still without a name, without the right shelf to store it on. When I went back to the hall, Bianca grabbed me by the elbow, asked if I was all right, and I said I'd bumped into a guest in the hallway. She ran her hand over my face, felt that I was pale, and offered a glass of water that I accepted without tasting. From across the hall, I knew someone was watching me. I knew it from what the air was doing, from the way an air current wouldn't complete itself on the opposite side of the floor, as if a silhouette were interrupting it. And I knew because the rare woody perfume, even buried beneath 300 others, had left a trace on my own collar when he bumped into me. I only had to turn my chin slightly to find it again on my clothes. I drank the whole glass. I didn't look over there, not that I could. "Who was the man you bumped into?" Bianca asked quietly. "I don't know his name. I'll find out." "No, you won't. I will." From across the hall, at some moment I didn't see but sensed from the restrained movement of the waiters, a low voice stopped one of them. It asked for a brief piece of information. The waiter answered with the trembling breath of someone who recognized the person before even processing the question. I didn't hear the answer. I only heard the silence that settled over the opposite part of the hall afterward, the kind of silence that weighs, and that takes a long time to dissolve. Chapter 2. The Client Who Doesn't Need Perfume. The next morning, I woke to the smell of Bianca's reheated coffee. She'd slept on my couch under the pretext of making sure you didn't lock yourself in the bathroom crying. I hadn't cried. I'd stayed awake until 3 trying to remember the exact weight of the hand on my arm, and getting annoyed at myself for doing exactly that. As if my brain had nothing better to do than catalog the touch of a stranger I didn't even know would show up again. "When you're thinking about him," she said, from the kitchen. "I'm thinking about work." "Same thing. By the look on your face." I told her to leave. I took a long shower, listening to the water decide for me that the day was going to start one way or another, and went down to the studio a little after 10. The neighborhood woke up slowly on Sunday mornings. The bakery run by the Italian on the corner already smelled of warm focaccia and melted butter. The newsstand man had changed the awning strip of fabric, and the new smell of the synthetic material mixed with the heated plastic of his coffee machine. The studio was as I'd left it. Clean bench, vials lined up, the shelf of essences in alphabetical order by the braille I'd glued onto the labels myself, little squares of paper that my mother said looked like Mendel's peas, but that were my external memory, the map that let me work alone without asking for help. I sat on the high stool, opened the commission notebook, and tried to work. I couldn't. 2 days passed like that. On the 3rd or Tuesday afternoon, I was measuring out a vial of iris for a client in New York when the bell over the door rang, and I knew, before his second step inside, who it was. The rare woody perfume arrived first, that combination of aged cedar, cold resin, and something that vaguely resembled wood smoke on a winter day. Then the footsteps, firm and unhurried, shod in something with a soft sole that barely scraped the oak floor. Then his silence, which had its own texture, like air before lightning. "Miss Mariani," he said. I set down the dropper carefully, so as not to spill the iris. "Good morning," I answered. "You found me. It wasn't hard. The address was on the ball's flyer, and you needed to find me. I needed to commission a perfume." I smiled, without meaning to. "Have a seat, then. The stool at the front of the bench is the most comfortable." He sat. The studio floor had a loose board in front of the bench that creaked under his weight, and it was from the creak that I understood he was a big man, maybe 6'3", maybe more, broad shoulders, from the way the fabric of his jacket moved when he adjusted his position. He sat upright, without leaning against the back of the stool, the manner of someone who never learned to recline, or never allowed himself to. "Who's the perfume for?" I asked. "For a friend." I smiled sideways, without turning. "A friend. You walk in here smelling of the same perfume from the ball, and you want to commission a fragrance for another man. All right, let's pretend together, but I can't compose a fragrance for someone I know nothing about. Hair, profession, age, whether he likes coffee or tea, whether he spends a lot of time outdoors, whether he sweats. Everything matters. A fragrance is a second skin. You can't get a person's skin wrong. There was a short pause. I'd bet it was amusement. He's a man my age, works in an office, doesn't like tea, hasn't worn perfume in 20 years. And you want to give a perfume as a gift to a man who stopped wearing perfume 20 years ago. I do. Why did he stop? Another pause, this time longer. Long enough for me to hear the noise of the street outside, a delivery truck going by, the brief bark of a dog, the bicycle bell of the boy who made deliveries for the corner pharmacy. I think he forgot he was allowed to. I wrote the sentence down in the notebook without comment. In silence, I started pulling 3 vials off the shelf. Haitian vetiver, Mysore sandalwood, a little green mate to open it. It'll take a few days, I said. Come back Friday. I'll come back. He didn't get up. I let it be. There was something in that stillness that didn't ask to be filled. He stayed silent like someone who has all the time in the world and knows exactly that he's using it. You mentioned the famous Italians, he said, after a while. Which are the 3? No, I didn't say the famous Italians. I said yours wasn't any of them. Same thing. It's not. I put the iris vial back in place. The 3 I recognize from a distance are easy. Anyone who works with perfume learns to identify them by the first note. Yours is hard. It belongs to someone who had it made to order for many years running with the same house. It does. For how many years? 22. I lifted my head, surprised enough to forget for a second that he couldn't see my expression, the same way I couldn't see his. You started wearing this perfume at 16. At 15. It was a family choice. A family that still chooses? Not anymore. I didn't ask anything else. There are questions you ask with your nose, and at those I was good enough not to need my mouth. I went on recording, without his knowing, what his silence held inside. Old weariness, discipline built on pain and not on habit, a kind of loneliness that had learned to dress well, to embroider its own coat, so to speak, so no one would notice the cold inside. Bianca chose that moment to open the studio door, in a way only she could, announcing herself 3 blocks ahead, by the sound of her heels, and by the trail of gardenia that arrived before her in any enclosed space. Viola, I came by to bring you a new jasmine that arrived today, and she stopped dead in the doorway. Good afternoon, he answered, with the trained politeness of someone who greets you without revealing a thing. Bianca, leave the lily by the sink, I said, without turning. I'll leave it. I'll leave it very slowly. I'll leave it calmly. Bianca, I'm going. She lingered on the way to the sink. I knew, without seeing, that she was sizing the man up in silence from the corner of her eye, cataloging every detail with the efficiency of someone who grew up in a neighborhood where reading a person fast was a matter of survival. When she finally left, she shut the door harder than she needed to, and I heard the bell jingle indignantly, as if even it had an opinion. Your friend, he said. My friend. Is she always like that? She's worse. She just held back out of respect for you. How kind. No, it's calculation. She's waiting for you to leave so she can come grill me. This time he laughed fully. It was short, low, and so rare that I suspected I'd invented it. But the temperature of the air in the studio had changed. A small thing, almost imperceptible, like when a window opens in a closed room. And those things I didn't invent. Miss Mariani, he said, standing up. The loose board creaked again under his weight. Friday, then. Friday. And you didn't tell me your name. Barbieri. Carmine Barbieri. I waited to recognize the name. I didn't. I listened to the news through a screen reader app every morning, but Philadelphia's coverage generally talked about things that didn't reach me, and I'll admit I skipped the local politics columns when the synthesized voice dragged on. Mr. Barbieri. Carmine. Mr. Barbieri, I repeated, smiling. Friday. He left. The bell rang in the most polite way possible, as if respecting the presence that was just withdrawing. I waited 30 seconds to make sure he'd crossed the sidewalk, and then the door opened again, in a hurricane of gardenia and contained indignation. Viola, don't shout. Viola, you know who that man was. Carmine Barbieri. Viola, sit down, Bianca. What's with that face? She sat. I knew it was sitting because the stool grumbled again, and from her hurried breathing pressed against my cheek when she leaned in close, as if the studio might be listening. Viola, that man is the most dangerous man in this city. What do you mean? Dangerous? Dangerous as in run from, lower your eyes and pretend you didn't see, change blocks when you hear the name. I stayed silent. She didn't exaggerate just to exaggerate. She exaggerated for good reasons, and I knew the difference in her tone of voice. He commissioned a perfume, I said slowly, for a friend. He doesn't have friends. He has henchmen. Don't talk like that, Bianca. I talk like that because that's how it is. I wiped the bench down with a damp cloth. The light smell of alcohol mixed with the vetiver that was still open. I took the iris vial and put it on the shelf. I set the cedar back in its right corner. Bianca waited in silence. And that, in Bianca, was a kind of kindness she only showed when she was truly afraid. He's coming Friday, I said, finally. He's not coming only Friday. I don't know what you mean. You know? I knew. Not admitting it, however, was one of the privileges of someone who didn't have to look anyone in the eye. Bianca left before the end of the afternoon, after making me promise 3 things that I promised with no intention of keeping any of them. I stayed alone in the studio. The silence after she left was always more complete. She took with her an amount of noise that I only noticed in its absence. I worked until 7, the smell of the essences keeping me company. The window cracked open, letting in the cold, late-afternoon air and the distant sound of the 5th Street bus rounding the corner. When I left, the wind was shifting from the east to the south, carrying humidity and the metallic smell of rain that was still far off but coming. That, in Philadelphia, at the end of that kind of afternoon, meant only one thing: a storm coming. Still on the sidewalk, with the studio key in my hand, I heard 2 men about 10 meters from me talking too low for an ordinary person, but loud enough for me. They weren't from here. An accent from the north of the state, or from across the New Jersey line. That flattened vowel, that drawled rhythm that didn't belong to my neighborhood's streets. They were quietly saying a name that meant nothing to me at the time. He's going to want to know about her. Who are you talking about? The one from the ball. The one who bumped into him. Shut your mouth out in the street, idiot. Nobody hears us here. I heard them, but I stayed still where I was, the key still stuck in the lock, pretending I was locking the door. I waited for them to pass. The 2 men's smell was horrible, cheap cologne over old sweat, the kind of mix that clings to the air for minutes after the person wearing it is gone. And it stayed in my nostril for half an hour after they'd turned the corner. I went back to my apartment without calling Bianca. I didn't want to hear what she would say. I ate little. I slept badly, with the wind scratching at the bedroom window and the downstairs neighbor's radio playing something I didn't recognize. A man's voice, low and unhurried, singing in Italian. When I woke up Friday morning, with the storm forecast on the radio confirming what my nose had already confirmed 48 hours earlier, I remembered that Mr. Barbieri would be back at the end of the day. And I also remembered that I had no way to get home from the studio alone at night, in the rain, with the cane slipping on the wet asphalt. Chapter 3. Storm and Doorway. Friday arrived with a lead-colored sky from early on. I smelled it before I heard the first thunderclap, that air charged with electricity that makes the iron of the vials vibrate discreetly on the studio shelves. The glass responded to the atmospheric pressure before I did. It was one of the things I'd learned to notice in the 11 years after the attack. The world warns you before things happen. You just have to know how to listen. Bianca had come by at 3 in the afternoon with a bouquet of jasmine, and a warning delivered in the same hurried breath. The world is going to fall apart at 6, Viola. I'm closing the shop early. Want me to take you now? I have a client at 5. She let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and the sigh of someone who'd seen this movie before. She didn't say his name. She didn't need to. Ever since that conversation that night, on the sidewalk, the subject of Carmine Barbieri had become a shared silence between the 2 of us. Too heavy to turn into a joke, too dangerous to stay out of my head. Client, she repeated. Ironic. Okay. She kissed my cheek and left, leaving the jasmine on the counter. I stayed alone with the smell of the flowers and the storm drawing slowly closer, from west to east, crossing the block in a drag of pressure that made the building's wooden doors creak in their frames. I organized the small vials. I washed the glass brush I used to weigh the bases. I checked the small refrigerator where I keep the most volatile essences. Anything not to admit that I was waiting for his footsteps. I also put back in its place the notebook I'd left open on the counter, not because I needed to, but because keeping my hands busy was the only way to stop imagining what would happen at 5. At 5:10, I heard them, firm, regular, a recognizable weight even through the noise of the wind that had started pushing at the door. Before anything, I smelled the rare, woody perfume, the Florence one, 22 years in the same bottle, now an intimate detail I no longer knew how to ignore. Miss Mariani. His voice came low, controlled, with that faint echo of someone announcing himself so no one would have to be startled. Mr. Barbieri. I answered from where I was, behind the counter. You're early. I'm on time. You're the one who always thinks it's too early. I smiled without meaning to. It was the second time he'd made me smile before any greeting, and the first had been in that chair, days ago, when I drew out of him the story of the perfume bought for 22 years of his life without changing a note. I was collecting these moments without realizing it, storing each one in the same place where I keep formulas I haven't finished. Not out of need, but because to discard them would be a shame. What do you need today? I came to pick up what I ordered last week. It's not ready. I sensed his silence shift. Curious. It's not ready, I repeated, this time slowly, because the woman who's going to wear it doesn't exist. I work with people, Mr. Barbieri, not with pretexts. His pause was short, but I heard the air shift inside his chest. He laughed. Low, contained, but he laughed. Touché. I can make a perfume for you, I continued, as if I hadn't just called him a liar. But you already have one. For 22 years. Maybe I want some variety. You don't want variety. You want to keep coming here. I said it without thinking. The word slipped out before judgment caught up to me, and by the time it did, it was too late. I felt my face heat up and turned quickly to the shelf, pretending to look for something that wasn't there. The silence that followed lasted long enough for me to regret every syllable. He took his time answering. When he answered, his voice had grown lower, closer, and I hadn't heard the footsteps, because his footsteps now were careful with me in a way other men never had been. Are you always this direct? I can't see, Mr. Barbieri. I don't have time for roundabout ways. The thunder cracked nearby, making the vials vibrate on the shelf behind me. The rain started all at once. Not the preliminary drops of an ordinary storm, but the raw collapse of something that had waited too long to fall. In seconds, the sidewalk became a river. I heard the water coming in through the old gutter of the building next door, the snap of the wind pushing some loose sign 2 blocks down, the engine of a big car stopping exactly at the studio door. My driver, Salvo, is outside, Carmine said. You're not going to walk home. I'll take a cab. In half an hour, no cab is coming down this street. I know. I lifted my chin. It was the part of me that still ran on pride. You had someone check whether I could get a cab home. I had someone check whether you'd be stuck here. I didn't know what to say. He used the silence to do what he did best. Decide. I heard the fabric of his jacket move, the faint sound of a car key being turned between his fingers, the firm footsteps going to the door to signal the driver. I'll take you home. It wasn't a request. It was the statement of a man accustomed to not being contradicted by thunder or by a woman. In that instant, I realized that I, too, had no intention whatsoever of contradicting him. I locked the studio with my back to him, with the key I'd always kept on a cord around my neck so I wouldn't lose it. I felt his hand draw near mine without touching, just the warmth of his palm a centimeter from my elbow, waiting for me to give permission. I extended my arm. His hand met mine, firm, warm, and guided me to the car with a care that not even Bianca, in so many years, had managed to learn. He let me set the pace. That was how he touched me, giving me time to feel, to confirm, to choose. Inside the car, the smell was of expensive leather, his woody scent, and rain coming in through the gap in the door before it shut. I heard Salvo say good evening in a short grunt and the engine respond. Deep. Address, ma'am? He knows, I answered. I sensed Salvo's smile without needing to see it. Just a shorter breath, a sound somewhere between amused and professional. Carmine sat beside me, not in the front seat. The car pulled away slowly down the street that had become a small river. The rain hit the windows with a fury that drowned out everything else, and inside that enclosed space of leather and woody scent I could hear, for the first time, his whole breathing, heavy, rhythmic, controlled like everything about him. The interior of the car was warm, a contained warmth that contrasted with the violence of the rain outside, and in that confinement I noticed every detail, the soft creak of the leather when he settled into the seat, the slightest hesitation before he crossed his arm near mine. But, in a second between one curve and another, his breathing faltered. You're tired, I said. How do you know? Your breathing stopped pretending. He stayed silent a moment. Then he gave a low laugh that seemed to have come out against his will. You'd be dangerous at a negotiating table. I'm already dangerous at a perfume table. It's the same thing. He laughed again, this time more fully. Why do you seek me out so much? I asked, before the fear could arrive. The question hung in the air like the steam of our breath on the window. For a moment, there was only the rain and the engine. I'd heard too much about him to pretend we were discussing bergamot essence. Because you ask me questions. No one asks me. he answered slowly. "I don't know enough about you to pass judgment. You do. Your friend hides nothing on her face, and you hear more than you let on." I swallowed hard. "And even so," he continued, lower, "you served me coffee last week without your hand changing. The hand doesn't change for reputation. It changes for smell. And what do you smell of mine?" I took my time. The question had no right answer. It had dangerous answers, honest answers, and answers that would leave me even more exposed than I already was on that leather seat, with the most dangerous man in the city a few centimeters from my mouth. I chose the honest one. I smell old wood, Florence, and a layer beneath everything that smells of someone very alone. His silence was different this time. It wasn't the silence of control. It was the silence of someone who had been seen and didn't know how to react to it. I felt the fabric of his jacket move slowly, as if he'd turned his face toward me and stayed like that, still, looking at me in a way I didn't need to see to feel on my skin. "You," he said, finally, "can't say things like that." "Why?" "Because I don't know what to do with them." The sentence caught me in a way I couldn't name. It wasn't the confession of a dangerous man. It was the confession of a man who had learned far too early not to receive anything. I felt the car stop. "We're here," Salvo announced, quietly. The rain had eased a little, but it was still falling hard enough to soak anyone crossing from the sidewalk to the doorway. Carmine didn't wait. He opened the door on his side, went around the car on the outside. I heard the sound of his footsteps crossing the standing water, and opened my door, shielding the entrance with his own body. "Come." His hand found mine without hesitation this time. We crossed the few meters to the doorway, muffling the sound of the rain with his own body leaning over me. I felt the wet fabric of his jacket touch my shoulder. I felt the warmth underneath. I felt the beat of his chest, off rhythm in a way he would never admit out loud. We stopped under the awning of the doorway. He was soaked from the shoulders down. I, miraculously, was dry. "Thank you," I said. "Don't thank me." "Why?" "Because it wasn't a favor." He was close. I smelled the rare woody scent, now mixed with rain, and the short rhythm of his breathing reorganizing itself. The water dripped from the awning behind us, monotonous, and for a second, it was the only sound that existed between the two of us. His hand rose, slowly, giving time, and stopped in the air, a finger's width from my chin, without touching, not in a grip, in a question. I tilted my face toward him without thinking. I felt his breath right above my mouth, the warmth, the smell of whiskey he'd had hours earlier, the silence of the whole world closing in around that exact point between us, and then he pulled back. It was a minimal movement, almost imperceptible, but I felt it, the air starting to circulate between us again, his hand leaving my chin, the weight of his body drawing away from mine as if he'd just remembered something that hurt. "Good night, Miss Mariani." His voice had hardened. "Mr. Barbieri, good night." I heard his footsteps move away. I heard the car door shut. I heard the engine pull out down the drenched street and disappear into the roar of the rain. I stood in the doorway feeling the absence of his mouth as if someone had taken a piece of my chest and carried it off in the back seat. I went into the building. I went up without greeting the doorman. I locked the apartment door. I leaned against it. Only there did I allow my breathing to tremble. I knew, now, with the same certainty with which I'd recognize bergamot in a field of jasmine, that that man had wanted to kiss me, and had chosen not to kiss me, and that this choice hurt him more than it hurt me. I went to lie down without turning on any light. I didn't know, that night, that somewhere in the drenched city, an envelope with no return address had just reached the wrong hands, with the address of my building inside. I would only find that out much later, and too late. Chapter 4. The Night at the Hospital. The week passed strangely, not because of what happened, because, in truth, nothing happened, but because of what stopped happening. Carmine didn't come back to the studio. He didn't send a message, didn't commission anything, didn't pass by on the sidewalk with Salvo driving slowly. The rare woody perfume vanished from my day, as if it had never existed, and I discovered, with an anger that shamed me, that I'd started counting the hours by his footsteps. Bianca noticed on Monday, "You've got the face of someone who got abandoned in the doorway." I wasn't abandoned. "You've got the face of someone who wished she'd been kissed in the doorway." I threw a wet cloth in the direction of her voice. I hit something made of glass that didn't break. By luck. "Bianca, just saying." She stopped saying it after that afternoon, but her silence got worse than the teasing. There was something in that chosen silence that told me she knew exactly what I was feeling, and that she also knew I didn't want to hear it. The week dragged on in small commissions, old clients, a wedding scheduled for the following month that asked for a bespoke bridal fragrance. I worked. It was what I'd always known how to do when the rest weighed too much. On Wednesday, I closed the studio after 10 at night. Bianca had left early for a family birthday. The flower shop next door was locked, dark, with that sweetish smell of stored flowers that always escaped from under the door. Old roses, daisies losing their water, a trace of eucalyptus the owner used to preserve the next day's bouquets. The street was almost empty. Almost. Because there was something in the air that didn't match the rest. I sensed it before I understood it. A strange smell. Cheap cologne. The breath of ordinary rolling paper cigarettes. A sweat with fear inside it. 2 men, I calculated by the breathing. One about 3 meters away. The other closer, maybe leaning against the wall between the studio and the flower shop. The closer one's breathing was short, too controlled, the way it gets when someone is waiting for the right moment. I gripped the key at my neck. "Good evening, ma'am," the voice came from the right, with an accent that wasn't from Philadelphia. I didn't answer. I started walking to the left, toward the main street, counting the steps from memory. 22 to the lit corner, 7 more to the bus stop where there were always people. I reached the 5th step. The hand closed on my arm with a force that wasn't ordinary mugging. I smelled the smell of his jacket, synthetic, cheap, and beneath it a perfume too strong that was trying to cover sweat. "Quiet," the voice said. "It's quick. Let go," I answered. "You're coming with us." It wasn't a mugging. In a mugging, they ask for the bag. They don't say, "You're coming with us." The sentence entered me like ice, and for a second the attack from when I was 15 came back whole. The smell of burning, the sound of my own scream that no one heard, the cold sidewalk under my face, and I froze at the exact point where I most needed to move. But at 26, I wasn't the 15-year-old girl who had collapsed on that sidewalk. I drove the studio key into the hand that held me. Years of carrying a key around my neck teach the body to turn metal into a defense before any courage shows up. The man let out a curse, let go of my arm, and in that instant the second one came from behind. I felt the air shift before he reached me. I dropped my body the way Bianca had made me train once, years ago, after I almost got hit at the corner. His arm passed over my head and struck the studio's display window with a dry crack. "Son of a bitch," he spat, but he didn't finish. I heard tires tearing the asphalt half a block away. A heavy car, armored, an engine I'd already learned to recognize through a rainstorm. Doors opening before the vehicle came to a complete stop. Firm footsteps, 2 pairs, crossing the street toward me. The footsteps of someone in no hurry, because he already knew what he'd come to do. There were 2 muffled snaps, short, far too close to my ear. Not the open burst of gunfire in a movie, but the compressed sound of a barrel with a suppressor. That dry thud that seems to strike inside your chest before it reaches you through the air. Then a body falling near my foot. Then another. Then silence. And then, before any voice, the smell, rare woody scent, mixed with something metallic I'd never smelled on him before. Viola. The first time he called me by name, I felt his hands find my shoulders, not in a grip, in a question, rising to my face, going down my arms, checking, verifying, with a haste that didn't match the calm he always cultivated. His palms were warm, dry, and trembled faintly at a frequency it took me a few seconds to recognize as relief. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Are you sure?" "I'm whole." It was the first time I'd answered without the formality of "Mister." I felt his body shudder at hearing it, as if that shift in tone carried more weight than everything that had happened in the last 5 minutes. "Salvo," he said, without turning. "Ambulance. It's already on the way, Dawn. And the 2 of them? I'll take care of it." The hospital observation room had the same antiseptic smell as always. Alcohol, cotton sheets washed in hot water, a sweet trace of saline dripping slowly somewhere to my left. But now it also had Carmine's rare woody scent, standing a step from the bed, making the whole room turn around his presence like an axis the rest of the room had to negotiate with. The nurse had left about 20 minutes ago. All the tests confirmed what I already knew. A bruise on my arm, a small cut on my hand from when I drove in the key. Too much of a scare for one night. Carmine hadn't sat down yet. He'd stood by the window, then walked to the door, then gone back to the window. I heard every movement of his like a metronome off-beat. His breathing was wrong. It had been wrong from the instant he touched me on the sidewalk. "Sit," I said. "I'm fine." "You're not." "Sit." He took his time, but he obeyed. I felt his weight sink the edge of the bed at my side, and the warmth of his hip meet my thigh over the thin hospital sheet. It was the first time we'd been this close with time to stay. The silence of the room was another kind of silence, not the silence of two strangers, but that of two people who had reached, together, a point of no return without having agreed to. "I got there late," he said. "And you got there." "I got there late, Viola." His voice was far too low. I sensed, with frightening clarity, that this whole man, the boss everyone trembled before, was on the edge of something he'd never let anyone see. "How did you know?" I asked. "I had Salvo watch your street ever since the night of the storm. Tonight, he smelled something wrong and called me. It took me a moment to understand. You had me followed. I had the street watched. Not you. Without telling me. You wouldn't have allowed it." I felt the anger rise in my chest before gratitude had a chance. 11 years defending the right to walk alone, to decide alone, to make mistakes alone. And there he was, deciding for me in the name of my safety, exactly as everyone else had done since I was 15. I gripped the sheet between my fingers, so as not to say anything I'd swallow later. When my voice came back, it came out firm. "Never again. You never again decide for me without telling me, Carmine. Not even to save me." His breathing faltered again. He took his time answering. "Agreed." Only afterward, when he agreed, did I let the gratitude arrive, mixed with another thing I still didn't want to name. "It wasn't a mugging," I said. "I know. They wanted to take me. I know. Because of you." His breathing faltered. That same breathing that had faltered in the car, days ago. "Probably," he answered. "I won't lie to you by pretending it wasn't." I extended my hand in the dark of my own world. I found his knee. I went up slowly to the hand clenched in a fist over his thigh, and I opened his fingers one by one. The skin was cold. The knuckles were scraped from something that had happened on the sidewalk, and that he wasn't going to tell me about, but that I could feel with my fingertips as if it were a map of everything he was. "You're hurt," I said. "No, you're hurt, Carmine." It was the second time I'd said his name. I felt his body respond to the sound as if I'd touched all of him. "Viola," his voice came hoarse. "I spent my whole life knowing that anything I let near me would become a weapon against me. Tonight, watching those two men holding you, I understood something I don't want to understand yet." I felt my breathing stop. "You should run from me," he continued. I know, Viola. And even so, I came here to sit on this bed and ask you not to run. I don't know how to run from what I feel." "What do you feel?" "You." The word hung suspended between us like steam. I felt his hand rise slowly up my arm, going around the bandage with an attention that seemed almost medical, finding my neck, stopping at my face with a reverence I'd never received from anyone. His fingers trembled faintly. It was the most intimate thing he'd let me feel up to then. "May I?" he asked, low. "You may." He kissed me slowly. It wasn't the hurried kiss in the doorway that never came to happen. It was the kiss of a man who had taken years to stop being stone, and who was yielding a centimeter at a time, as if he feared hurting the mouth receiving him. I tasted his old whiskey, the warmth, the pause between one movement and the next, in which he waited for me to confirm with my breath that he could continue. I confirmed. He went deeper, just enough, a steady hand on my face, his thumb on my jaw, the weight of his body leaning over me in a way that asked permission at every millimeter. It was a kiss that weighed like a confession, like surrender, like a man saying, without a single word, that it had taken his whole life to reach that hospital bed. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine. We stayed like that for a length of time I didn't measure. His breathing was mixed with mine, and the room had shrunk to the exact size of the two of us. "I'm not going to be able to take this back," he said. Low. "I don't want you to." His breathing, finally, found a rhythm. My heart, by contrast, was still on the sidewalk, being held by a strange hand. "Viola," he said after a moment, and his voice had changed again. "Tell me again. Everything you sensed about those two men." I was surprised by the change. "Why?" "The smell, the voice, the accent, everything," I told him. "Cheap cologne, the breath of ordinary cigarettes, a strong perfume covering the sweat of fear, an accent that wasn't from Philadelphia, farther north, maybe. Synthetic clothing, the hand of someone who didn't work with his hands, and one thing I'd registered and only now, on that bed, managed to put into words. The second man's jacket had the same smell of a specific tobacco that I'd sensed on the sidewalk, days before, on the two strangers who were talking about the capo from the north. I felt Carmine's body harden beside me. Are you sure? I am. He stayed silent a moment too long. The bed didn't move. His breathing didn't change. But there was a new tension in the air, different from the one that had filled the room since he'd arrived. When he breathed, it was different. It wasn't the breathing of a frightened man. It was the breathing of a man who had just identified exactly whom he was going to visit before dawn. Salvo, he called, without getting up. The door of the room opened at the same instant. Salvo had been standing outside all night. Dawn. Carmine leaned close to Salvo's ear, and the syllable escaped low, but I caught it. Niccolo. I felt Salvo breathe in deeply from the other side of the room, the breath of a man who understood the whole sentence from that name alone. Are you sure? She is. Salvo stayed silent a second. Then, in his dry voice, I'll get the car. The door closed. Carmine leaned over me again. This time he pressed his mouth to my forehead. A new gesture, more intimate than the kiss, heavier than any promise. I felt the warmth of his lips linger there a second beyond what was necessary. I'm going to take care of this. I know. You're going to stay here until morning. Salvo will leave a man at the door. All right? Viola. Yes. When I come back, I'm going to take you home, and not yours. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He stood up. I felt the warmth of his body leave me like a door shutting in a cold room. His footsteps were firm to the door. They stopped a moment. They came back. His hand found mine again. Squeezed. Once. Hard. Don't sleep afraid, he said. I won't. Promise. I promise. He left. I stayed alone in the room with the smell of the hospital, the trace of rare woody scent on the sheet, and the certainty, installed in my chest like a new bone, that the man whose name Carmine had whispered to Salvo would not see the sun rise over Philadelphia, and that, for the first time in 11 years, I wasn't afraid of the dark. Chapter 5, The Hunter Hunted. I was discharged the next morning. Salvo came to pick me up at the hospital. Carmine still hadn't come back from wherever he'd been handling things, and he didn't say where. Drove in silence to my building, and waited for me to go up before moving the car. The smell of the hospital was still stuck in my hair when I went into the apartment. Bianca grabbed me by the shoulders before I'd taken 3 steps, shut the door with her foot, and breathed in deeply near my temple, as if she wanted to confirm that I was whole. Her smell, jasmine and wheat flour, always, made me let out the breath I hadn't even known I'd been holding since the hospital. You smell of disinfectant and dangerous man, she said. I don't know which of the two scares me more. I tried to laugh. The sound that came out was hoarse, scraping the throat that still hurt from the scare of 2 nights before. I felt my fingers tremble when I tried to take off my coat, and Bianca took it off for me, in silence, the way she only got when something threatened to break inside me. He went after the guy, I murmured. The one who sent those men. I know. How do you know? Because his driver came by the door 20 minutes ago to check that you'd arrived. And because the man who carried you off the stretcher yesterday isn't the type to sleep before he settles things. I let myself drop onto the couch. The fabric smelled of old lavender and clean cotton, the smell of home, the smell of before. The rare woody perfume was still on my skin, on the curve of the neck where he'd pressed his mouth in the hospital room. And I didn't want to shower. It was childish, I knew. But it was the only thing of mine in that moment. The only tangible proof that it had truly happened. Bianca brought tea. She sat on the floor, near my feet, and stayed a while without speaking. It was her way of taking care of me. Noise to the world. Silence with me. I heard the steam rising from the cup, that almost imperceptible sound that most people ignore, and I stayed focused on it for a few seconds because it was simple, and because my brain needed something simple. Viola. You're going to be with him. It wasn't a question. I squeezed the cup between my hands. The warmth passed through my fingers and up my arms, and it was the first warm thing I'd felt since leaving the hospital. I don't know what I'm doing by. Yes, you do. You've never known so well what you were doing in your life. You're just afraid to admit it. I didn't answer, but she was right, and the silence between us sounded like a confession. I slept badly. I woke several times in the dark of my dark, thinking I heard footsteps in the hallway, thinking I recognized a way of breathing. Nothing. Only the wind beating against a branch outside. Only the old pipe groaning up above. Only the apartment responding to the night's cold with those wooden snaps I'd never managed to map properly. In the late morning, I went to the studio. Bianca nearly fought with me, but I needed the smell of the vials the way I needed air. She finally gave in, with one condition. She'd be on the other side of the wall, in the flower shop, with the phone in her hand. We left together and parted on the sidewalk, and I knew exactly where she was standing watching me go, because I could feel the weight of her gaze on my back. The studio received me as always, dry bergamot at the entrance, cedar to the left, a base of vanilla, where I keep what's not yet ready. Bianca had gone to make a delivery in the late morning, and promised to come back running, but I knew she'd be late. She was always late. I ran my hand slowly over the benches, letting my fingertips find each vial, each braille label, each familiar surface. It was like greeting old friends. I sat on the high stool and closed my eyes out of an old habit that served no purpose and still calmed me. The phone rang a little after noon. It was Salvo. "Ma'am, Salvo. He asked me to let you know he's all right. He asked you to let me know and not to talk to him." Silence on the other end. The kind of silence that was his, that had texture, dense, calculated, the silence of a man who thinks before each syllable. He's not near the phone right now. Where is he? Handling things. Salvo. "Ma'am, is he going to come back whole?" A short pause. And that single sentence of his, the one that always wrecked the room. He will. Whole is the only thing he knows how to come back. I hung up and stayed a long time with my hand resting on the phone, as if the device still held the warmth of his voice. The bench smelled of neroli essential oil that I'd spilled earlier by accident, and the sweet and slightly bitter smell hung in the air for a while. Like a question with no answer. The afternoon fell slowly. The sunlight changed temperature on my hands, first warm on the bench, then cold on the sink, then disappearing for good. I lit the cedar incense I usually burn when I work at night, and the thin smoke passed near my face when I stood up to change vials. The studio seemed, for an instant, the same as any other day. The air was still, heavy with overlapping aromas, and I was almost convincing my nervous system that everything was fine. It was at that instant that everything collapsed. A car braked on the street, not the normal sound of brakes, the short, harsh sound of someone stopping without finishing stopping. I heard 2 doors open at the same time. I sensed, from the displacement of the air under my door, 2 bodies standing still on the sidewalk. 2 men who weren't walking, weren't talking, just waiting. And I recognized the tobacco. That same tobacco from the alley, from the mugging, from the night I still hadn't finished coughing out of my lungs. I stood up from the stool. I couldn't move much beyond that. The studio door had a double lock, and I'd turned it when I came in, out of instinct, because the body learns before the head does. Bianca had gone out to make a delivery half an hour earlier. She'd told me on the phone she'd come back running. She didn't come back in time. The phone was still on the bench, near my right hand, but before I could reach it, I heard another car arrive, heavier, an engine I knew, Salvo's armored car, with that specific rumble, deep and steady, that I'd learned to recognize in the past weeks without realizing I was learning, and from the smell that came in through the gap in the window, I knew who got out first. Rare woody scent, from Florence, carmine. It all happened very fast. There was no shout. That was the first thing I noticed. No one shouted. Through the closed door, muffled, came the dry sound of something striking the wall of the building, a short dragging of feet that seemed to come from the sidewalk, and then a different silence, heavier, the kind that comes after something ends. Minutes later, when the studio door opened, the smell of gunpowder came in with the first step, acrid, metallic, recent. I leaned against the studio wall. I put my hand to my chest, and the heart was in the right place. Strangely, in the right place, beating fast but steady, without the broken rhythm of panic. I should have been trembling to the bone, and I was standing still. Still in the way that only happens to someone who has understood, at some level beneath thought, that she is being defended. I heard the studio lock turn from the outside in. Someone had forced it, or someone had a key. The door opened. The smell of gunpowder came in first, acrid and metallic, settling into the cold air of the studio. Then him. I didn't run to him. I didn't pull back. I stayed where I was, against the wall, with my hand still open over my chest. "Are you hurt?" I asked. He stopped in the middle of the studio. I felt the air stop with him, as if the whole room were waiting for the answer along with me. As if the question had reached a place inside him that no one had touched in 20 years. "No," he said, low. "I'm whole. Whole is the only thing you know how to come back." A sound I'd never heard came out of him. It wasn't exactly a laugh. It was more a breath that surrendered. A small, involuntary sound that escaped before he could contain it. He drew near, slowly, in the manner of someone who fears I'll pull back. I didn't pull back. He stopped a hand's width away, and I smelled the gunpowder mixed with the woody scent, and beneath everything the smell of him, of warm skin, of the thing I'd already learned to call home in a very old part of my chest. Viola. Yes, I need to get you out of here. I know. Not to your home. I know. He took my hand. His fingers were warm, firm, and I felt with my fingertips a small graze on the knuckle of his index finger, the skin slightly broken. For an instant, all the serenity I'd managed to hold nearly came undone, but I held it. For him, because I understood, in that second, that he needed me to hold it. Is Salvo outside? I asked. He is. And the man? He took half a second. Half a second was a long time for Carmine Barbieri. That man is never going to show up again. Never again. And the sidewalk. Salvo's already cleaning it. In 10 minutes there won't be a body, there won't be blood, there won't be police called. This street has been ours for 30 years. Viola. Whoever saw, learned not to see. And whoever sent them, one of my own. Niccolo. He thought he had the stomach to do what he did. He didn't. We left through the back door. The alley was damp, with that smell of wet earth and cold asphalt that Philadelphia keeps in the corners. No one photographs. The armored car was parked there, engine running. I felt Salvo's hand hold the open door before I reached it, with that firm way of his of someone who was always exactly where he needed to be. He said nothing when we got in. He only checked from the corner of his eye whether I was steady and shut the door with that unexpected delicacy he had for small gestures. I texted Bianca from the car. Just, I'm fine. With Carmine. I'll explain tomorrow. She answered in less than a minute with 3 curses, and the promise to kill Carmine with her own hands if anything happened to me. I heard on the other end a silence from someone who wanted to scream and was holding back only out of respect for my calm voice. Then the phone rang. And if anything happens to you, Viola Mariani, I'll kill that man with my own hands. You can't reach his height, B. I'll stand on a chair. I hung up smiling. I didn't manage to keep smiling for long. The car went up. I sensed the private elevator from the soft hum of the motor, from the change in pressure in my ears, from the different silence that exists when there's no longer a street outside, only height. The penthouse smelled of leather, books, and the same woody scent that I now knew better than my own name. Carmine guided my hand to the back of an armchair, and I sat. He paced the room. I heard his footsteps weigh in a specific way, not of worry, but of someone trying to find words that don't usually exist in his life. Viola, no, you haven't even heard what I know what you're going to say. You're going to say it's better for me to leave. That with me near you, I become a target. That you can't guarantee anything. I've heard that sentence from other people, in other words, for 11 years. I'm not going to hear it again. He stopped. I sensed, from the displacement of the air, that he had knelt in front of me, and that gesture, heavy, low, told me more than any sentence. Carmine, yes, no one has decided about my life in 11 years, and you're not going to start now. He brought his hand to my face. His fingers passed over my temple, the bone of my cheek, the corner of my mouth, slowly, with an attention that wasn't hospital care. It was something else. It was a man learning a path he intended to travel many times. Are you sure? He asked, the voice low, almost rough, scraping at the edges. I rested my forehead against his. I felt his breath strike my mouth, warm and irregular, and I understood that he was as close to the edge as I was. I've never seen anything with such certainty. He kissed me. It wasn't the hospital kiss. That one had been of relief, of urgency, of 2 years of restraint leaking out all at once. This one was older and newer at the same time. It was the kiss of someone who had decided to stop delaying. I felt his hand land on the back of my neck, firm, and the world, for a second, became only the size of that touch. I stood up without letting go of his hand. He guided me, down the hallway, by the cedar smell of a door that opened, by the thick silence of a bedroom that smelled only of him, clean, warm, without a trace of anyone before me. The door shut behind me. Night fell over Philadelphia. Chapter 6. The Woman He Loves. I woke slowly. The light coming through the curtain was warm on my hands, and the air carried the smell of coffee made somewhere not too far away. For an instant, I stayed still with my eyes closed. My eyes always closed. My eyes that the sun changed nothing about. Just feeling. The soft sheet under my skin. The pillow with the smell of cedar and warm skin. The weight of a heavy arm resting on the curve of my waist. Firm in the way of someone who doesn't usually let go of anything he holds. Carmine's breathing behind me was slow, like that of a man who'd truly slept for the first time in a long while. I didn't move. I didn't want to break it. I felt it when he woke up. Not by movement. He didn't move. by his breathing changing in depth, slightly more conscious, slightly more present, by the hand that opened on my waist as if checking that I was still there. It was a small gesture. It was a gesture that told me more than any word he could have said that morning. "Good morning," I said. "Good morning." His voice was hoarse in a new way. I smiled without showing it. "There's someone at the door," I whispered. "How do you know?" "The smell of fresh coffee, and footsteps too heavy to be yours." He gave a low sound in his chest that I was already learning to call a laugh. He got up. I felt the mattress give and rise back, heard the fabric of a shirt sliding over his shoulders. He went to the door and opened it a crack. "Salvo," on the other side, in a dry voice. "Brought coffee." "I won't look." "You already looked." "I'm paid to look. But today I'll charge extra." The door shut. Carmine came back. I felt his weight sit on the edge of the bed, near my hip, and the mattress given a specific way I was already cataloging as his. "Did he charge enough?" I asked. "Salvo always charges enough. And he'll die pretending he didn't see." I extended my hand. I found his face first by warmth, then by the short beard that lightly scraped my palm. I touched the corner of his mouth. He turned his head slightly and kissed my palm. A lingering kiss. The kind that didn't need a sentence. The kind I'd keep in a memory different from the olfactory ones. Deeper, harder to name. The kitchen was spacious. I knew it from the short echo of the footsteps, and from the way the voice opened without finding a nearby wall. The floor was cold under my feet, probably dark stone, judging by the temperature, and the air smelled of strong coffee mixed with bread that had been warmed not long before. I felt the cold marble when he guided my hand to the counter and placed a cup between my fingers. The coffee was strong, with a distant note of cardamom that revealed itself at the end. Someone in that house knew exactly what they were doing. "Who made it?" I asked. "I did." "You know how to make coffee?" "I do." "What else do you know how to do that I didn't imagine?" He didn't answer. I felt his hand touch mine lightly, his thumb pass over my wrist, with a light and direct pressure. It was an answer, too. We ate fresh bread, fruit, something with honey that clung slightly to my fingers. He guided my hand without rushing me, placed things near me before I needed to ask, without making a ceremony of it. At some point between the coffee and the second sip, I realized I was at peace. It was a strange word to think inside that penthouse. Inside that life. Inside the day on which I'd woken up knowing that a man had been killed because of me 2 nights before. But I was at peace in that old way. The way from before I was 15. The way I'd buried along with the last face I saw. Carmine took me out to the terrace afterward. The Philadelphia wind arrived smelling of steel and river, of the city I'd known by air currents for more than 10 years, each neighborhood with its own texture, each street with its own particular noise. I leaned against him. He put his arm behind my waist without needing to be invited. "Tonight," he said. "Tonight what?" "Leah organized a ball at her place. Private. Only our people." I remembered the hall. I remembered the bump in the hallway. I remembered the 12 weapons I hadn't seen, and the silence that opened up when he whispered a single word to the men around him. "You want me to go? I want to go with you." It was a small difference. It was the whole difference. "All right," I said. He turned my face toward his with his hand on my chin. He rested his forehead against mine and stayed there, quiet, breathing the same air. "Viola, yes. Tonight I'm going to introduce you. Not as the perfumer, as the woman I love." I took my time answering, not out of doubt, out of an excess of something that found no word. "You know what that means for a man like you." "I know. You know what's going to change starting tonight." "I know. And even so. And even so." I pressed my mouth to his. It was a short kiss, a kiss of agreement. That night, the hall received people differently. The smell was the same as the first time. The official perfume I'd composed myself, wet gardenia, amber, a base of sweet tobacco that opened with the warmth of bodies, but the texture of the air was different. There was no scattering of fear in the room. There was attention. There was an attention so concentrated that I felt it in my fingertips, in the way the party's collective murmur dropped in tone the moment we walked in. I entered on Carmine's arm. I sensed, all around, the collective change in the breathing of people who understood, without needing a word, that something that had never happened before was happening. Don Barbieri was holding someone's hand in public, slowly, without disguising it. Leah Falcone approached a few moments later. I recognized her perfume before the sound of her heels. Iris and leather, always, with a note of bergamot at the end that she must have touched up every 2 hours. Viola, darling," she said, and her voice had a sideways smile that didn't need a face to be read. "You're luminous. You're kind. I'm not. I'm just observant." I felt Carmine squeeze my hand lightly. It was his way of saying thank you to Leah without saying thank you, without opening any crack in the exterior he wore like a second skin. We walked through the hall, brief greetings, polite voices, the discreet rustle of expensive clothing. Glances I couldn't see but felt land on the back of my neck, on my wrist, on the non-existent ring some people were already searching for with their attention. At some point, Carmine stopped in the center of the hall, held my hand at the level of his chest, and spoke, not loudly. Carmine never spoke loudly, but the hall went silent in the way it only goes for someone who has learned to obey the tone, the specific weight of a voice that doesn't need volume to cross an entire room. Hours earlier, inside the car that brought us, he had rested his forehead against mine. His warm breath struck my mouth when he spoke, low, too close for anyone else to hear. "I love you, Viola. I want you to hear it from me before anyone inside hears it." I couldn't answer. I pressed my mouth to the corner of his and let the silence answer for me. It was with that sentence still on my skin that I entered the hall on his arm. And now, in the center of the floor, with his hand firm in mine, he spoke in a voice that carried the whole room. "This is Viola, the woman I love." The silence that followed was of another nature. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. I felt Leah exhale a short laugh, 3 meters away, satisfied and contained. I felt Salvo, behind us, shift his weight to the other leg, in that almost imperceptible way of his that meant approval. The music came back. Carmine pulled me to dance. I rested my head on his chest, the heart beat firm, heavy, in the measure of a man who had decided and would not turn back. I smelled the rare woody scent mixed with the warmth of his skin, and underneath, deeper, a new note I'd never smelled on him before, a light layer, almost sweet, that only appears in someone who stops holding himself back. "You're smiling," he said, in a low voice, against my hair. "I am." "Why?" "Because I never thought I'd get home, Carmine, and I got there." He squeezed my waist. He didn't answer with a word. He answered with his body, with the way his arm closed around my back like a decision, with his breathing dropping deeper near my temple. It was at that moment that an air current passed along the right side of the hall. A man was talking quietly with someone, near the back door. I didn't hear his voice clearly, only the tone, too calm for a party, too polished for an ordinary guest, measured in a way that wasn't social. It was professional, and I smelled it. A single note, acidic, clinical, sterilized, something of a hospital, but not of a hospital, something finer than that, more expensive, more isolated, as if it had been filtered and reduced until only the essence of an antiseptic environment remained. A note I'd never catalogued among perfumes, that matched none of my maps of people or places. I narrowed my eyes in my usual dark. I tried to hold the note, to track it, to find a reference that would anchor it. But the air current shifted, the man moved, and the smell dissolved into the room's collective gardenia. "Carmine," I whispered. Who's near the back door?" He turned slightly, without letting go of my hand. "I don't see anyone strange." "Are you sure?" "I am. Only guests." I thought about insisting. I didn't insist. The music rose. He turned me slowly, and the smell didn't come back. I rested my head on his chest again. I closed my eyes inside the usual dark, and this time it was by choice. I felt his hand rise up the back of my neck, stop behind my ear, rest there with a lightness that contrasted with everything I knew about him. I sensed that I was, for the first time in 11 years, in a place where my whole body knew where it was, without needing to map it, without needing to build the environment step by step with smells and currents. Home. And somewhere far behind that thought, in a small corner of my olfactory memory, that acidic and clinical note stayed stored, without a name, without warning, just one more note among the thousands I catalogued that night, filed away with the involuntary care of someone who doesn't yet know what she's storing. I paid it no mind. The music went on. Carmine whispered something into my hair that I don't need to repeat here, and I smiled against his shirt, feeling the firm heartbeat, feeling the rare woody scent, feeling the new peace, without suspecting that, in the depths of memory, a single note had just settled like a seed,